Moving into this neighborhood was supposed to mark the beginning of a peaceful life, far removed from the relentless noise and bustle of city living. I had envisioned a serene retreat, but what I hadn't anticipated was the sheer madness of the Homeowners Association, HOA, and, more specifically, the iron-fisted reign of Linda, the self-appointed monarch of our community. She seemed to believe that everyone was obligated to cater to her every demand, while she floated above the very rules she enforced with ruthless zeal. This clash turned personal the moment she set her sights on my meticulously tended hedge, a lush, thriving barrier of greenery I'd nurtured for years, which she deemed an annoyance. Rather than simply steering clear of it like any reasonable person might, Linda took it upon herself to repeatedly ram it with her oversized SUV, flattening sections of it with her front tires, leaving behind a wreckage of broken branches, shredded leaves, and a simmering fury that ignited in me every time I stepped outside to survey the damage. Initially, I opted for diplomacy, as any sensible adult would. I approached her with a polite yet firm request, explaining that the hedge was well within my property line and asking her to refrain from driving over it. But as soon as the words left my mouth, I saw the smug grin tugging at her lips, a look of pure disdain, as she lowered her oversized sunglasses just enough to lock eyes with me. Her response was a masterclass in condescension. "Oh, darling, if it's in my way, maybe you should have picked something tougher." With that, she sauntered off, her high-end heels clicking sharply against the pavement, leaving me standing there, jaw tight, fighting the urge to shout. I wasn't ready to let it slide, though, so I turned to the official channels. I documented the destruction, snapping photos of the tire marks, and filed a formal complaint with the HOA, certain they'd address this blatant vandalism. To my dismay, their response, delivered 2 days later, didn't reprimand Linda. Instead, it scolded me for failing to maintain landscaping that didn't obstruct common areas, an absurd claim, given that my hedge was entirely on my own land. When I confronted the HOA president, a jittery man who always seemed moments away from a breakdown, he mumbled some excuse about Linda raising concerns about the hedge's placement and suggested I consider alternative landscaping. It was a ludicrous proposal. Her reckless driving was the only thing causing harm, but no amount of reasoning swayed him. It became painfully clear that the HOA would never challenge Linda, not when she wielded such sway over them. I was left with two choices: let her continue demolishing my property or take action myself. I briefly considered installing a camera to catch her in the act, but I doubted even hard evidence would sway the HOA. They'd likely twist it to absolve her. They weren't interested in fairness. They were interested in shielding their own, and Linda was undeniably one of them. So, I tried one final direct approach. One afternoon, as I watered my lawn, I saw her SUV barreling toward my hedge yet again. I didn't shout or lose my temper. Instead, I calmly walked over, arms crossed, and said, "Linda, this is the last time I'm asking nicely." Her response? A loud, mocking laugh that rang through the street. "Sweetie, I don't have time for your little plant issues. Maybe try something sturdier next time," she sneered, revving her engine and grinding her tires deeper into the ruined foliage before speeding off, leaving me in a haze of dust and exhaust. That was the moment I realized diplomacy was futile. The HOA wouldn't intervene, and Linda had no intention of stopping. If I wanted this to end, I'd have to get clever. Staring at the latest carnage of my once pristine hedge, a plan began to take shape. Something so ingenious, so subtly wicked, that I couldn't help but smirk. If Linda wanted to keep this up, she was in for a surprise she'd never see coming. I spent the next week plotting every detail of my counterstrike, determined to execute it flawlessly and leave no room for Linda or the HOA to pin the blame on me. I couldn't risk them spinning this to cast me as the villain when I was merely reacting to her unchecked arrogance. After consulting a landscaping friend, researching thoroughly, and weighing every option to transform my battered hedge into a strategic trap, I settled on the perfect solution, one that would safeguard my property and ensure Linda regretted ever targeting me. The key was simple: reinforcement. She might not care about delicate shrubs, but she'd certainly care if her precious SUV took a beating, and that was exactly my goal. I replaced the ruined hedge with an identical row of bushes, but these concealed a hidden menace beneath their verdant surface, a framework of steel spikes, anchored with rebar and thick iron rods, buried in the ground and positioned to be invisible at a glance. To anyone else, it was just a continuation of the soft greenery Linda had trampled so casually, but in truth, it was a tire-shredding, axle-ruining fortress designed to make her next assault a costly mistake. Best of all, it was technically legal. I was simply replanting my hedge and reinforcing it to prevent further damage. If the HOA tried to object, I had ample evidence of Linda's repeated vandalism to back me up. But I didn't stop there. I installed a discreet, motion-activated camera, perfectly angled to capture her inevitable downfall, ensuring I'd have irrefutable proof of her recklessness. Then, I waited, my patience unshaken, knowing Linda's predictability was her weakness. Sure enough, 3 days after I finished, I spotted her cruising down the street in her usual haughty manner, oversized sunglasses glinting in the sun, making no effort to slow as she veered toward my property, expecting to flatten my hedge as always. But this time, she had no clue what lay beneath those innocent leaves. The instant her tires hit, there was a sickening crunch, followed by a piercing screech of metal on metal. Before she could react, both front tires exploded with a deafening pop, her SUV lurching forward at an odd angle as the undercarriage scraped viciously against the hidden spikes. The noise was so jarring it sent birds fleeing from nearby trees. Then, as if fate wanted to pile on, the impact triggered her airbags, engulfing her in a cloud of white fabric as they deployed with a hiss, muffling her stunned gasps amid the groans of her wrecked vehicle. For a moment, silence blanketed the neighborhood, everyone holding their breath as Linda sat there, dazed and trapped in her crippled SUV. Then came the meltdown, a glorious, unhinged spectacle. She shoved the airbag aside, flung open her door, and stumbled out, shrieking as she took in the ruin of her once immaculate luxury car. That's when I stepped onto my porch, coffee in hand, feigning innocence. "Oh no, Linda, what happened? Did you hit something?" I called out. The glare she shot me could have melted steel, her face twisting with fury as she jabbed a finger at me. You did this. You're going to pay," she screamed, practically frothing at the mouth. Before I could reply, neighbors began to gather, drawn by the chaos, their eyes darting between Linda's mangled car and my pristine hedge. I noticed a few sly grins and hushed whispers. Linda had enemies here, and for once, she wasn't in control. As she ranted about sabotage and lawsuits, she only dug herself deeper, looking more absurd by the second. When an HOA board member, a frazzled woman clutching a clipboard, arrived, she surveyed the scene, sighed heavily, and fixed Linda with a stern look. "Karen, this is the third complaint about your reckless driving this month. Maybe you should try staying on the road instead of blaming others," she said, her tone cutting. Linda's outrage was palpable. She wasn't used to being challenged, but no one rushed to her defense. I seized the moment. "By the way," I said casually, holding up my phone, "I've got it all recorded, just in case anyone's interested." Linda froze, her eyes locking onto my phone in panic. She knew she was caught, knew there was no way to twist this, knew the HOA wouldn't shield her now. Her face cycled through rage, disbelief, and finally defeat. The tide had turned. She'd spent years terrorizing the neighborhood with her petty tyranny, but now, standing beside her totaled SUV, she was powerless. The HOA woman, still rubbing her temples, turned to me. "You said you have footage?" she asked, her voice flat. "Yep," I replied, waving my phone. "Happy to share it with you and Linda's insurance company. They'll want to know how this happened." Linda's face flushed crimson. "You can't," she began, but the HOA woman cut her off. "Enough, Linda," she snapped. That single command seemed to drain her, and for the first time, she had no retort. I pressed further. "Since this isn't the first time she's damaged my property, I think it's fair she covers the repair costs," I said. Linda gasped theatrically. "Me? Pay for that ridiculous bush?" The HOA woman sighed again. "He's right, Linda. We've got multiple reports of you driving onto his land. If he files a complaint, we'll have to act." Linda's bravado crumbled. Her car was her own liability, and her insurance wouldn't be pleased. She tried to protest, but no words came. Instead, she stormed back to her SUV, slammed the door, and drove off at a pitiful crawl, leaking fluids trailing behind her. The street erupted in chatter. Some laughed outright. Others murmured, "She had it coming." An older neighbor, Mrs. Grayson, approached me with a grin. "You planned that, didn't you?" she asked. I shrugged. "I just protected my property. If Linda wrecked her car in the process, that's on her." She chuckled. "Well, thank you. She's been a nightmare for years. Maybe the HOA will finally wake up." She was right. Linda's downfall rippled through the community. With her influence gone, others spoke out, demanding change. Within a month, the HOA voted her off the board, stripping her of her reign. She soon sold her house and vanished, a disgraced figure exiting stage left. My hedge. It thrived. No more tire tracks, just vibrant greenery, standing as a testament to justice served. Each morning, sipping coffee on my porch, I'd glance at it and smile. My home was mine again, and it felt better than ever.